Hello and welcome to Extraordinary with me, James Wallis, the podcast that shines a light on ordinary people who have gone on to do and see extraordinary things. And in this episode, I'm joined by footballer turned fitness fanatic turned LGBT advocate. It's Jake Williamson.
I used to play football to a relatively high level and then came out as one of the only gay active sort of players at a semi-pro level, I would say. And I didn't really have girlfriends or anything at school. I had a cracking upbringing. I love my upbringing. I wouldn't change it for the world. But obviously when you look back and see things in hindsight, there's obviously elements that you would be like, okay, yeah, that wasn't quite as it should have been. As much as we think it's gay, straight, there is avenues. It's a construct, isn't it? We've made it up. I just wasn't ready, in terms of an emotional side of things, in terms of being jealous over exes, being jealous over things, because I never had that at school. My football career didn't take off. And I think if I continued to play football, I genuinely don't think I would have come out. I wasn't oh my God, people are going to say stuff or things like that. That didn't bother me too much. It was my own thoughts and my own feelings and the fact that I didn't necessarily want to be gay. Because it's, as much people say it's a choice, it's not a flipping choice. And if you had the choice, you probably wouldn't choose it. I've never actually told anyone this.
Before we begin this episode, please don't forget that this podcast is not sponsored or monetized in any way, which is why I signed up to buymeacoffee.com, which is a platform that allows creators like me to do some crowdfunding that helps contribute towards the ongoing cost and maintenance of running the podcast. So if you did want to contribute just a small amount, I've set my price at just £3, so it really is the price of a coffee. I will leave the link in the show notes and in the link tree, which is across all of my socials. And lastly, if you do enjoy this episode, please don't forget to leave a rating or a review from wherever you're listening from, whether it's on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. And if you are on YouTube, please don't forget to like and subscribe also. With that being said, and without any further ado, enjoy the show. Jake Williamson, welcome to Extraordinary Podcast. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Done my 10K for the day and I'm feeling pretty fresh. Nice day out as well, so can't complain.
I mean, the way you framed that, I actually don't think I've ever done a 10K in my life. I did couch to 5K and then that was my running career.
Lockdown couch to 5. Nice.
I was really proud of myself. So we've come across each other on social media. You reached out to me, we had a good chat. And turns out that you've got this whole amazing, extraordinary story that obviously I just needed to hear on the podcast. So I really appreciate you giving up your time and sharing your story with us. Before we begin, for those that don't know, if they're not following you, the amount of content you're putting out, I don't know how anyone can not be following you. But tell us all who you are and what you do.
I never actually know what to say because there's so many different avenues. I guess the main thing, who I am is I'm Jake Williamson, 24, Birmingham based at the moment. I used to play football to a relatively high level and then came out as one of the only sort of gay active sort of players at a semi-pro level, I would say. No longer really playing football, but currently full-time personal training and training for a competition called High Rocks and active runner and mostly LGBT activism in terms of the sporting world, just because we all know the difficulties of coming out, whether you're quite clearly a homosexual or whether you're not exactly overtly gay. But my sort of, not stance, but the way I sort of approach things is obviously in the more masculine sporty world and trying to sort of be a role model for either pros, young men, older men, just different people, females and people of different religion as well. So places where it can be really tough to come out, but obviously it's difficult for everyone, but there's different sort of avenues as we know.
And I think you are just doing such an amazing job of that. And the reason why you're so interesting is because there is such little representation in the circles, and from where I'm sitting, it's just like a distant dream of ours to see LGBT footballers on the male side. I know that there's probably more on the female side, but there's just such little representation in football. Let's jump straight in then, because I'm keen to understand what your kind of your formative years were like and what that coming out experience was like. Like, how was your childhood?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not naive to the fact that I'm very grateful. I had a great upbringing. Parents were never sort of struggling for money, things like that. Like we never had that sort of struggle in a sense. Looking back, obviously I had my own sort of battles that I potentially didn't know that I was dealing with, especially going through sort of your more puberty type years, where you start to try and figure yourself out and where things go. And I think that's sort of where my sporting side of things kind of really came out, because I kind of pushed so far into that side and took my mind off everything else in terms of having a girlfriend, like really going into that sort of emotional side of things sexually or physically, I guess. And my physical outlet was run and play football and just have that as my attention. Like I didn't really have girlfriends or anything at school. But yeah, I had a cracking upbringing. I love my upbringing. I wouldn't change it for the world. But obviously when you look back and see things in hindsight, there's obviously elements that you would be like, okay, yeah, that wasn't quite as it should have been.
And I'm keen to understand what that means, though, because I remember being, I don't know, year 8, year 9, when everyone was starting to get girlfriends, and it was like the whole hooking up thing, like who you're going to take to prom, and what do you think of this one? And then everyone starts talking about, porn and all sorts of stuff. Like, as someone who I'd imagine, if you're into football, if you're into running, you're at the forefront of like that masculine energy. Were you kind of putting on your masks and your capes and trying to just bury it? Like, did you engage with the girlfriends? Did you have girlfriends? Were you hooking up? How did that present itself?
Yeah, I was never like a player as such, just because obviously the interest wasn't as there as it should naturally be. It was almost like it's hard to say forced, because it feels like if anyone's listening who I was potentially with or had a relationship with, like it sounds really dickish, excuse my French. Like there was obviously emotional and feeling there, and you're so confused that you're like, sexuality isn't fluid. Like there's no sort of like, as much as we think it's gay, straight, like there is avenues. It's a construct, isn't it? Like we've made it up effectively. So I think, yeah, I obviously went down that route because that's the route you're told to go down. That's the route, as you said, in the masculine world where you're playing football, you're sort of deemed as this macho person and you're potentially quite popular and you're thinking, right, I need to sort of street cred and things like that. Yeah, I had partners, but I never really had like at school. I talk about it quite a lot in terms of my emotional disattachment. Like when I first got with Paul, I just wasn't ready, like in terms of like an emotional side of things, in terms of like being jealous over exes, being jealous over things, because I never had that at school. And I think that's quite a big thing in the gay world that isn't really spoken about. Like I never had that. I wasn't ready for it effectively because no one ever spoke about it, in terms of like having relationships at school and that partner then going and being with someone else in the same school is like, that's big. And I never even thought about that. Like I was just like, oh, whatever. Like, do you know what I mean? So, yeah, that was something that I wasn't ready for.
That's really interesting because this has come up quite a few times for me recently, where I think I watched a TikTok on it actually, where they were talking about how gay men in particular have like a different chronology, as in like things just happen much later for us. Like there's a delayed maturity emotionally, sexually, romantically, because everything is just so suppressed until you come out. And then your coming out is almost like living your teenage years. So like all our heterosexual friends and stuff are like cracking on with marriage and kids while we're just literally discovering for the first time what we like and don't like.
Yeah.
So what was the relationship like between you realizing your sexuality, I guess, or like coming to terms with, that the feelings of difference with like your career pursuits? Because I guess when you hear, and I've heard Jake Daniels talk about this a lot, it's just kind of like the two just don't seem compatible. How are you going to solve for that?
I guess I was kind of lucky in a sense. I guess lucky and unlucky that my football career didn't really take off. COVID happened as well. I was meant to move to Chicago and hopefully sort of progress up the ladder there because I had trials in Inverness, which didn't work out. And then COVID kind of happened. So my football career didn't take off. And I think if I continued to play football, I genuinely don't think I would have come out or come to the stages as soon as obviously as I did. My thing for me was like an internal battle, like internalized homophobia. It's a massive sort of talking point in the gay community, and people that speak to me, they're always like, I don't want to be gay. It's like, I hate it and things like that. And it's like, I kind of had, not as bad as some people have it, but I had those feelings of, you're told that it's a bad thing. I didn't really have any gay people around me growing up. So yeah, for me, it was like a switch. I met Paul and we had like 3 months of pretty much just FaceTime and just chatting, and just sort of, it was kind of like an acceleration educational course for me in terms of what being gay is effectively. And once I came to the realization that, yeah, it is okay. For me, it wasn't necessarily what other people thought of me. Like, I obviously care, like everyone cares what people think of them, but I wasn't like, oh my God, people are going to say stuff or things like that. Like, that didn't bother me too much. It was my own thoughts and my own feelings, and the fact that I didn't necessarily want to be gay, because it's, as much people say it's a choice, it's not a flipping choice. And if you had the choice, you probably wouldn't choose it, to be honest. I love being gay and I love my life, but ultimately, if someone gave me a lie detector test and said, would you rather be gay or straight, I'll probably choose straight, just because it's so much flipping easier, and you don't have to go through all the traumas and things that you go through. But once that switch flipped, it kind of was just like it was like within a day or two, I'd like told all my friends, family, things like that. Like, it wasn't really a big thing anymore. Obviously, at the time it was. I cried every day and and cried every time I told different people. But so I won't downplay it. It was very, very difficult time for me. But once that internal sort of feeling went, which obviously massive thank you to Paul, it was kind of like a, right, excuse my French again, it was like a fuck it moment. Like, let's do this type thing. Like, this is, I don't have a choice. Like, this is me. Accept it, or just sort of
do one.
Yeah.
So talk to me about like the order of events then, and like, had you come to did you know you were gay before you met Paul? How did you meet Paul? What was that interaction like?
Another thing for me was, I was always attracted to older guys. So at school, it was very easy for me to hide emotion. Not hide emotions. It sounds weird, doesn't it, when you say hide emotions? But like, it's just the easiest way to explain it. I guess hide emotions and not have the desire sort of take over of sort of like that sexual urge, I guess. So for me, it was never really an option. When I was 16, 17, I wasn't like, oh yeah, I'm going to go and get with a 30-year-old, because one, it's not fair on them because it puts them in a situation. But then also I wasn't ready. And again, it's just not something that's safe for anyone. So for me, it was easy to hide that at school. I was never going to come out of school, I don't think, anyway, just because the attraction for females and males at that age group was pretty much the same. It just wasn't there. Like, I don't find people my own age attractive, really. Obviously, there's the odd exception who probably look about 35. But yeah, and then, so I did know, but it was easy for me to just, again, focus on sport, focus on work, uni, mates, things like that. And then I guess I wasn't necessarily seeking a relationship, but I was at a point where I was 20, 21, 22, where I was seeking that. I needed that urge that takes over, effectively human instinct, that I hadn't had. I hadn't met anyone. I hadn't done anything. I hadn't even kissed a guy type thing. So at that point I was like, right, I need to get this out of my system and see whether this is like the real deal, or whether I'm just going through the phase, or whatever people call it. Long got a phase, by the way.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then I met Paul, and that was really it, to be honest. And luckily, first time lucky, which not everyone can say.
You're very lucky. I always say, I think a lot of people come out too early. I think I came out too early, because I feel like you're forced, or you're like plunged into this world where like you have to go through like the gay clubs, the hookups. You have to try Grindr and Tinder and Hinge and Chappy. And back, I'm older than you, but you know, there were like, we had to go on websites and go on like chat rooms to like talk to people.
Think that Paul's in his 40s, so he's like dialing up phones to get some.
But you know, it's an amazing story. It's kind of like super romantic. It's kind of what I think we all hope and dream for. So like,
because we all know the gay world is not like that in any way, shape, or form.
No, it's horrendous. I can't say enough how horrendous it is. So how did you meet? And also, just before we go on to that, like, did you therefore like not ever date anyone else but Paul. That's amazing.
Yeah. But how did we meet? It was online. Obviously wasn't out, and I was very, very much in the closet. Like, I didn't want anyone to know. I was like serious. Like, this is not getting out. Like, no one's finding out about this ever. Again, massive internal homophobia, which is awful, and I not regret, but obviously.
To be honest, I've been trying to reframe this because I don't think it's internalized homophobia. I think it's shame. I just think there's something a little bit deeper than that. And because we were born
into the bracket, it's a bracket that comes under it, I guess.
Yeah, totally. But I think it's when people say, I hate being gay, or I've got internalized homophobia, I think what they're really saying is that I don't fit into the world because I was made to think I'm unlovable because I am gay. Mm-hmm. It's like a slight nuance there, but anyway, I won't get too deep or philosophical.
I mean, we could go on to this for ages, but it comes down to stereotyping as well. Because I didn't fit, there was clashes, and I was like, I don't want to be that type of gay, but because if you're told you're gay, you almost feel like you have to then be like,
yeah, like what's your reference point? Does it mean that you have to start wearing different clothes, wearing makeup, like hooking up? Like it's you don't really know what type of gay you need to be.
I created my own gay, effectively, which is what people should learn, that's what gay is. Like, gay is just not anything other than the fact that you like another male. And then there's a beautiful side of things where you can be queer, or you can be masculine, or you can be whatever you want to be. And it comes under the queer bracket, and it should be celebrated, rather whether you're masculine or whatever you are. I think that's the beauty of the word queer nowadays. And then obviously we've got each of their own under the LGBTQ plus. I mean, I get educated every day still massively, which is a big thing. But in terms of the initial question, how did I meet? But it was online, so I've never actually told anyone this. I used to go on Tinder, and I would delete my photos, and then I would go on to the males and then swipe on whoever I liked, and then come back to the females and just put my photos back on. And somehow I realized that those that I liked would still see my pictures, but no one else would. God knows how I figured it out. I guess it's just trial and error type thing. But that's how and then that's obviously how I matched Paul.
But for someone who was so scared of being found out, that's quite high risk, isn't it? Because I think I certainly know people who were in the closet, maybe still are in the closet, and because I've seen them on Tinder or whatever back in the day, and they would never like anyone, but they would show up in the feed of men.
I wasn't an expert, to be fair. I just went with it. And to be fair, I was kind of lucky in a sense that I had people use my profile on like Tinder and stuff before, so I could just be like, oh, it's just it's a fake account.
It's a catfish.
1 kilometer away from you.
That's so good. So So you met Paul, you matched with Paul, you're chatting, you're FaceTiming, and I assume that led to dating?
Yeah, so it was kind of just before COVID. So obviously we've been together 3 years, just over. We were kind of lucky that it was an emotional connection rather than physical. Obviously I had as I discussed, the sort of urges and human nature and desire type thing. But for me, as I said, again, it was that sort of learning what it is to be a gay man and sort of finding my way in that gay world. So that first like 3-4 months when it was like proper lockdown, like you weren't meeting up like as much as you wanted to. That was just all pretty much FaceTime and just chatting and learning about each other. So there was that emotional connection way before there was that physical intimacy, which was, I guess, put us in a nice little, I guess it's a bit old school, isn't it, when you write letters or things like that.
Oh, he was a pen pal.
Effectively, just in like a technology-ridden world.
So you were in the south of the country?
Yeah, I was living in mum and dad's in lockdown.
Wow.
And Paul was up here in Birmingham.
Wow.
And then obviously things started opening up. Paul's cricket, so cricket nets and golf and everything was open. So I learned how to play cricket and upped my golfing skills pretty dramatically. I hadn't come out at that point, so I told my mum I was playing golf with my friend Ed. I told him this the other day, and I'd leave at like 6 a.m. and wouldn't get back to like 9 p.m. because I drive up to Birmingham and I'll be like, yeah, long game of golf this one. 18 holes isn't long enough, so we did 2 or something like that. Started to get a bit fishy when because I shared the car at that point, when the car started racking up some serious mileage from going up to Birmingham and back.
What was that first interaction with Paul like face to face?
Oh, I was so nervous, like mega. So we say that we did meet up. We met up before we FaceTimed. Literally we went for a walk and just met up. And I thought, yeah, I was like, to be honest, I actually thought, like, you hear all the stories of, you're like, because I hadn't told anyone. So I hadn't told anyone my location or anything like that. So there is a danger element to it. Like, I didn't know Paul at the time. He could have been absolutely anyone. He could have been a catfish. He could have been someone dodgy. It was nerve-wracking, but yeah, well, obviously worth it.
So how's your life changed since coming out? I'm assuming that you went through the process of, okay, so you've gone on enough dates with Paul to then tell friends and family. What was their reaction like? What was, your in the context of football, the fitness world, your fitness friends, what was the general reaction?
Majority was, I can't say another word like any better. Like, it was honestly like, as you should probably expect, it was perfect. Like, I shared the initial post that I shared when I first came out, like publicly was screenshots of friends' messages, like after I told them. So I've obviously written a nice big paragraph and as you do, and because it's a lot easier than FaceTiming everyone or calling everyone. And I'd send that to friends either in group chats or individually, of those that not that I was scared to tell, but just that I was like, I don't know. I just, like, some people you could easily tell, and then some people you just wanted to just send a message because it was like, I don't want to tell you. Either you're really close to them and you don't want to lose that friendship, or that, like, either way. So that on my Instagram, probably way down now because I've posted quite a lot since, was the post, which is just like people's messages back to me, and they're really nice. It makes me cry when I go and read it. So I'm not going to go and do that now. But yeah, and then I FaceTimed a few friends to begin with. I genuinely, 10 minutes, took me at least 10 minutes of crying before I could like verbalize it in those initial stages. Like that, it genuinely is the most emotional outpouring like you can ever imagine, even if you don't think it is. Like, it's really hard to explain. Like, I didn't think it would be as difficult as it was in terms of just verbalizing it, just saying the words "I'm gay." Like, it honestly was like, like you just can't say it. And then obviously my parents was really difficult. Like, I told my dad, and I was on the floor, like my stomach had like curled up from crying that much. And he genuinely asked me the question. He asked me if I was dying. Like, that's how like that. Yeah. Like, you can't even, like, for someone to say that to you.
And was that because you were crying before you verbalized?
Because I was crying that much. And I was like, I was like, I need to tell you something. And he was like, and then he started crying. I was like, oh. And he was like, are you dying? I was like, no, I'm just gay. And looking back, it's so ridiculous. Like, it's absolutely just, it's nonsense, isn't it?
But it's interesting though, because sometimes I get guests on the podcast and they're just like, yeah, my coming out was amazing. My parents were so supportive and I'm so grateful to have them. And even though I think the story is going to continue for you to say my parents were great, like, my parents weren't great, to be totally honest. And there's a reason why coming out is still such a big deal, unfortunately. So for the gay person who's closeted and is about to come out, genuinely, it is kind of life or death. You genuinely don't know if you're going to be cut off. I was actually listening to Ryan Clark's new podcast on how to be a man, and he was interviewing, who was he interviewing? I think he was interviewing Jake Daniels. I think I was listening to that episode. And even Rylan, who he admits himself, who was campus Christmas from a kid, he packed his bags thinking that he was going to be disowned when he came out, because they do sometimes catastrophize and think, okay, well, what if that does happen?
That's another thing as well, is I had the backing of Paul at that point as well. Like, in your head, you don't think that's a reason why you can come out, but I was in a good enough connection with him where I was like, right, if things do go south, there's outlets, like there's places for me to go or do or whatever. Dad was fantastic. Dad was sort of like the rock. It's really hard to say like if your parents weren't good with it, because you feel like you're like throwing them under a bus a bit. Mum did struggle. We're so close. Like I'm a proper mummy's boy. Anyone that knows me, friends and family, know that like we're literally just like tight. So having her find it difficult was really, really emotionally straining, which I've never really opened up to about it, to be fair. It's one of those where you just don't talk, do you? As humans, we're just like, we just don't offload an outlet sometimes, and you tend to do it to one particular person and not those that are probably closest to you. I would always say time heals, in my opinion and my experience. If you want things to work and they're willing to listen and be educated and sort of understand, then things can and will work out. Obviously, there's certain circumstances where it's almost like it's their problem. Like you can't do anything. Like it's their mindset, and if they don't accept you at some stage, then it's on them. Like you can't control that. You can only do you, and they should accept you for who you are. And if not, you don't choose your family.
Couldn't put it better myself. That's exactly it. I think for anyone's parents who don't accept them for coming out, then that's not your shame or your burden to carry. It's entirely on them. But I also, and this is kind of the result of lots of therapy sessions more than anything. I've come to terms with the fact that if a parent doesn't accept their kid for being gay or whatever, even though on face value that's a huge shame and really disappointing in a lot of ways, often it is because they are just a product of their own upbringing as well. Like normally born in the 50s, 60s, where it was entirely illegal to be gay, and in their head, they just want the best for their kids. And there's like a safety concern or like a future concern about, are you going to be able to be as happy and as fulfilled as you were as a straight person?
There's so many different strings and things and like that go on in their head that you don't necessarily think about. And it's like they almost feel like they don't know you as a child, and they don't know you, and that you've been lying to them your whole life. And it's like, and that it's a choice. And it's like, but as long as you're able to have that connection and discuss and almost sit down and let them talk about things and their feelings, and you take it on board as well, because you can't be naive to the fact that yes, parents will struggle. Like they want you to grow up and have a nice, straight, conservative, beautiful, happy lifestyle, which at the end of the day, not everyone has, even if they're in a straight relationship. And half the time they probably definitely don't. And also, Susie down the road is probably pegging her husband, doing something behind the door. Like it's so backwards that it's only because it's a visible act that you're getting. But like, yeah, there's so many.
Yeah, I could have a whole podcast series on this.
Yeah,
it's fascinating. But you are shedding sort of new light and a different perspective on this also. That's really interesting. So how did you go from, so you've come out, generally speaking, all very positive, you're with Paul, you've now become a thing on social media, like you're turning out content like there's no tomorrow. You're on podcasts. I saw you on Sky News and Good Morning Britain, and like you're becoming like a role model, an accidental LGBT mascot for the masses. Like, how did that come about?
I think initially it was kind of therapy for me, as you said. Like I've never had therapy, and I've never been to a therapist, and I think people should. I do think like there's a massive. And it shouldn't be a big taboo subject. And if you need it, and if you think that you might help, even if you don't think you need it, you might go and do a session and find it valuable. For me, this was my therapy initially. It was doing the Q&As and discussing certain topics and becoming a bit more comfortable in myself. So that helped me. So verbalizing and having communications really, really did help. I think I always say that to people. It's like, have the conversations, whether it's with me, whether you just send me a voice note, I will listen to it and I'll get back to you at some point. But you're offloading, you're getting that outlet out. So it was like when I told my friends and came out on FaceTime and spoke to them, it took me 10 minutes to even verbalize the words, because that was the first time I'd ever said it. Like I genuinely it was like, for me, it was like that overnight. So the reason why it was such a big outpour is because it was all in one go. It wasn't ever sort of a slow trickle approach. So that for me, and the reason why I started doing it is because I found it so difficult coming out. And like, again, we won't beat around the bush. It's really tough. Again, as I said, whether you're quite clearly gay or not, it's a difficult process. And I didn't want anyone else to go through that. And I mean, we have no role models really. Jake Daniels is a great role model, and he will become one. But at the end of the day, he's a young lad who's not played at the pro level really. Again, that don't mean any disrespect to him, but we don't have major role models in sport really. And I just wanted to be another one of the small piece of the puzzle that might help someone else, because I've been through it. So that was it. And then because I'm obviously training for certain things and I'm massively into my fitness and I'm training to effectively become the fittest man in Britain, according to High Rocks, like that's my aim. That kind of put me in a place where it was like, yeah, I kind of am competing at the highest level. It's just football is the pinnacle of sport, effectively, and I'm not playing football anymore.
Call it what it is, which is that I think you embody all the things that are so associated with masculinity.
Yeah, effectively.
You represent a world that is often quite intimidating and quite exclusive to people that aren't gay. And I think not for any right or wrong reason, it's just that there is no representation. So we were all brought up to know that actually there are no gay footballers, like period. There aren't. They don't exist. There's no gay athletes, blah, blah, blah. Or if there are, there'll be like gymnasts or something that, or synchronized swimming or, divers. And that, again, no disrespect, but
yeah, it's really hard because you feel like you're slacking them off.
It's taken me 56 episodes or whatever to be a little bit more explicit about what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And it's not, and I think people like Tom Daley, for example, are incredible role models. And I would never want to take, what he's done for the community away. But we also need people in the footballing world, in the rugby world more often. I know there's a couple, and in cricket and everything else to also come out. And I'm keen to get your thoughts on like your personal views on homosexuality in football. Like, has there been any progress?
It's such a difficult question, and I got asked it live on Good Morning Britain, and I was like, "Oh, I don't know what to say." I was like, "I have no idea how to phrase this." Like as soon as you say something, you could just get absolutely and you can't go back. You can't go back. So I think initially, I think it's down to the structure of just life in general. I spoke about it a little bit in terms of like politics and the way that the government's run, and it's really not helped LGBTQ plus people. But then also structures of things like academies, and these young boys that have been in academies, especially in the Premier League. Most of the lads that are in the Premier League, they don't come from Sunday League. They don't come apart from like your likes of Jamie Vardy or the very, very odd occasion. These guys are brought up in the best academies in the world, and they've played football at this level since the age of 6. And these academies, again, yes, they will be changing now because of the amount of pressure that sort of is put on them to be diverse and inclusive. But 5 years ago, maximum rather, it would have been very, very heavily toxic. You have to be the best. You have to train. You have to be this. You have to be masculine. You can't be. And then gay is on the other side where it's like, this is a weakness. You can't do this. Blah, 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 blah. So they're built in a world where they have to be masculine, and it's very elitist. And being gay almost takes you off that elitist pedestal and puts you somewhere over here where you're not going to make it to the very, very top. So it's really difficult in that regard. That's just one small little pea in a pod. And then there's just life as a whole, like structurally, like fans. Paul was in Manchester today running the 10K. Manchester are playing Chelsea. On his walk down through the city, anytime Manchester fans saw a Chelsea fan, they were shouting "Rent Boy." People need to know that it's a hate crime. You can get arrested for it. But because of the structure and the way that we are and the way that we live and the herd mentality, nothing's going to get done, really. Like, those guys aren't going to go and get arrested for shouting "Rent Boy." And ultimately, obviously, that they should, really. But yeah, it's really difficult because it's like, to be honest, like, if someone shouted at me, I'd be like, it's off. Like it doesn't really affect me. I'm like, you're not, but then they're also not necessarily saying it. I can't say that because they probably are, but they're not necessarily saying it from a homophobic standpoint. It's an abusive term that they use to say to Chelsea fans. Do you know what I mean? Like
I totally get it. From my perspective, I'm more concerned about the 15, 16-year-old kids who are at the match hearing that and feeling like they can't come out, similar to maybe why you had to wait till you were 21, 22.
Yeah, and also the other kids who are hearing it, who then think it's acceptable language, acceptable to then take into schools, to then take into, like, it's still there, which is then why obviously we're kind of getting a gap. I've had quite a lot of conversations with people who work in schools. Loads of kids, Paul goes into schools quite a lot and does works with diversity role models, and you can see a change in the school. So it's almost like coming like getting squished. So somewhere in the middle, we'll get there. And in the next few years, we will see more footballers. Again, back to your initial question.
Yeah.
On a tangent. But we will get there. It's just like, it's hard to say people like me, but it's just more of that will make a difference, which is hence why I am doing it, because I see the value in it.
Yeah. Same. The same reasons for me in this podcast. If people are listening, I know people are listening who have friends or family that are experiencing sort of anguish over their sexuality or whatever, but I think the more that we can talk about it and be more visible, and this is why I've kind of changed my mind on my thoughts on pride. I used to hate pride, and now I think it's like super important.
That's another point though that I would address, is that like a lot of people who are in the closet, for me, for example, when I first was coming out, I didn't want anything to do with the Rainbow Laces campaign. I was like, that is not me. But now I'm trying. I get it. Like, I get the community element of things, but people don't when they're first coming out. So we need to sort of find a way to, again, if it's people like me or Jake Daniels, or kind of broadening the LGBT and the Rainbow Laces into the more masculine world. It's really difficult to explain again.
I know it's really hard to articulate it in any other way but that. And unfortunately, it is those kind of toxic areas of football that we have the most popular. And my personal view is that the clubs just need to be much, much harder. The same way that they treat racism. I know racism is not perfect by any stretch of imagination, but they need to start coming down harder on homophobia as well.
Yeah, I think we're so built up in a world where homophobia isn't seen as a hate crime. Like, it isn't seen on the same level as racism. And I'm not necessarily saying it is, but it's still a hate crime. It's you don't have a choice. But we're not there yet.
Unfortunately, we're not. But some people think we are there. And that's why, again, I do this podcast, because I want people to know that we are absolutely not there. We've made progress, but we don't have any professional gay footballers at Premier League level. Is wild.
Though, and League One and League Two, I don't think there's any.
Yeah,
apart from Jay Daniels, but he's not playing. He's an academy product effectively, who's got a pro contract, so he's not playing in the championship, sadly. So it's tough. We'll hopefully we'll get there. But
so obviously you've made appearances on the news, and like you're big on TikTok, and you're talking about your fitness and your relationship, which I think is so lovely. I love that you're so open, and you talk about Paul a lot, and I think that's really again part of the things that one of many areas in which the LGBT community needs to get better at is focusing more on like monogamy and not hookup culture, and talking about relationships and kind of moral things. Again, I'm sounding like an absolute like hard nut today. But how has the attention been? Because obviously, like, you've got a great body, you're very young, you're fresh out of the closet. If anything's true, I mean, I remember, and the WhatsApp group kicked off the day Jake Daniels came out, the gay WhatsApp group, because everyone's like, oh my God, we've got a gay footballer. And then I just saw like the followers, like his followers just went up and up and up. All the gays were following him, sharing stories, like the Instagrams, the tweets, the everything. And it was just like, in a way, it's kind of symbolic of how shit our representation is, that we all have to sort of like flock to the gay footballer. But I've also seen similar comments on your TikToks and your stories, and kind of I'm keen to understand how you react
As I said to you sort of off air, I don't tend to scroll or be too active on it. Like I'm either working out, and if I'm working out, I'm filming, and if I'm not filming, I'm editing the videos or voicing over or doing whatever you need to do on TikTok these days to make it make it work.
If you've got the formula, let me know what it is.
and then if not, I'm either with Paul or with Roxy or my dog, or just chilling. To be honest, so again, it's kind of you shouldn't, but you kind of think it's kind of part and parcel of putting your half naked body online. Like it comes with that. But I think because I want to sort of pursue down the modeling type career, and then also fitness is a thing for me. And I've always, because of the fitness world, your top's off quite a lot anyway. So you're not really self-conscious about it. So it's not a sexual act for me. Like it's not like, oh, he's got his top off type thing. Whereas obviously if Paul was posting pictures of his top off, we'd be like, whoa, like kind of what's going on here? Not like it's a two-way thing, but
what does Paul think of it?
Yeah, he's because it's kind of picked up a bit since obviously I've always posted and I've always been quite active, but obviously the following and things has gone up quite quickly, and the comments are pretty ropey sometimes, and I try to delete the ones that are like way out of
the line.
Yeah, like some of them are okay. Like if people put emojis or whatever, like I'm just like, yeah, algorithm,
great for engagement.
Yeah. But then obviously I've got to start thinking about him and how he feels about certain things as well. So it's a conversation we do have quite a bit, and it does affect him, and he doesn't necessarily like it. But he also has to understand the bigger picture and the other elements too as well, which I show him the messages that people send, and he understands sort of like from a career perspective as well in terms of like a modeling side of things or helping other people and things like that. So there's a lot of different, again, strings to the bow, which he's slowly getting better at. But he does struggle a bit with it, which obviously you can understand. I completely understand myself, so I'm not naive to that. But also, yeah, he understands. But also, naturally, if you understand, it doesn't mean that you won't necessarily get affected by it.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And one more thing that I wanted to speak to you about was that I heard, I can't remember if this was on one of your other podcasts. I can't believe I wasn't the first to speak to you, but I'll let it go. That you spoke about a team that you were playing in, like, didn't receive the news very well at all. What happened there?
So I had literally just moved to Birmingham as well and was playing for a team. One of my mates who actually not recommended them, but he knew of them because he's a massive Villa fan. So he runs my football team back at home, like my Sunday team, where it's just me and my mates. And he sort of said, "Oh, that these are a list of teams, sort of thing, and these were the closest ones to me." So just naturally, I was like, "Right, I'm going to just message them and see if I can play for them." Played about 4 or 5. This is just Sunday League, by the way. This isn't like any decent level or anything. It was locked down pretty much, so only really Sunday League was played. And if I wanted to play Saturday football, I would have kind of just sat on the bench because that's kind of how it works if you don't know the system and you don't know the teams and they don't know you. So I was like, right, I won't play Saturday yet. I'll just go and just muck about and get the ball on my feet. So I think I played like 4 or 5 games, to which the league was pretty naff, to be honest. I'd scored 3 or 4 and assisted a couple. Not like I was counting, but yeah. And then I did the podcast with Jack. So I'd come out and then I'd spoken to Jack and then we did the podcast and I'd basically just sort of shared my story as a footballer coming out. And ironically, after sharing it as a footballer and being like, right, it's really difficult to come out in sport, the next game, I was in the group. I was in the group chat and they put the team sheet in the group chat before the game. And I'm not like, it's not like I was the first name on the team sheet, but the team wasn't great. And I was clearly like better effectively, and would have started and had been starting every game since. And then they literally didn't even put me on the team sheet and just like didn't even comment on it. And then I effectively was like, right, that's obviously the reason. So I eventually left the group chat because I texted the guy and said, I'm available to play, and nothing. So I left the group chat and was like, right, fuck this.
What? And then he ignored the message.
Yeah. And one of the girls who was like, she was kind of part of the team, but just from like a I think it might have been a girlfriend or a friend or whatever. But she went to most games, and she sort of just messaged and was like, "Oh, I'm sorry," or something like that. And I was like, I was basically just like, she didn't say it. And then I bumped into someone like a couple of weeks later or a month later, and they were like, "Oh yeah, the manager put a message in the chat saying, oh yeah, guys, have you heard?" or something like that about Jake or something. And I was like, "Oh," and that was it. And no, to be honest, I haven't. I won't obviously say the name or team or anything like that, just because it's not worth it. But the team doesn't exist anymore.
Wow.
Yeah, to be honest, it didn't actually affect me too much. I know it's really shit, and I know it's awful, and I kind of just laughed it off in a way. I was like, that's just, I didn't even know that could happen effectively. But yeah,
I mean, I've heard a lot of bad things that have happened to gay people, but it's just wild.
There's no like physical, tangible evidence either, so I can't like take it. I couldn't like take it to the FA. I couldn't like. No one had called me a gay, whatever. Like, it was clearly homophobic, but it was just like that emotional. Like, what the?
Yeah, like, it's an attack on your sexuality for sure.
And also for my sexuality to be that much of a part, to not put me in the team, even though, like,
your sexuality overrid your performance or your ability.
My skill set.
Skills. I can say it for you. I knew what you meant.
I do have some modesty. It's hard to big up yourself too much.
You've got to big up yourself if you're going to do podcasts.
Yeah.
All right, so we've come to the end, and I've absolutely loved this conversation. I feel like I could talk to you for hours. I had a list of questions, and I kind of disregarded them about half an hour ago because I was just like saying grace with your story. But one thing I ask all my guests to do is write a letter to their younger selves or give their younger self some advice. Is that something you've prepared or thought about?
Yeah, I've not written a massive letter or sort of gone into too much detail. I think my biggest thing for anyone is that time heals. No matter how difficult the process that you're going through or what you're thinking about right now is, there is always an end. There is always something that will get you through, and whether you think it's going to find you right now. For me, obviously my outlet was potentially pool or other things, football, sport, my current job. There's always a next step. There's always a journey, and life isn't always up. There are definitely downs. Like for me, I randomly just started crying like 2 weeks ago. Like I had like 3 days in a row where I just cried, and I had no idea why. Like I was just emotionally like stressed, and it's okay to be in that state, but things will get better. You just have to sort of either wait, but don't wait around too much. Go and find that thing that makes you tick and things like that. And I think that comes from obviously my coming out and having experiences. Like one of my really close friends took his own life, and that for me was like a massive wake up call in terms of when I came out as well. So that was kind of just before I came out, and it was like, right, you don't just sit around, like go and chase life, go and there's more to life than just sort of being either sad or upset. So go and chase that, go and find what makes you tick and run with it.
I love that. What a beautiful way to end the podcast. Jake, thank you so much for coming on, and I'm wishing you all the very best for whatever it is that you do next, but just keep representing the community so well the way that you already are, because it is having a massive effect, and you're moving mountains doing what you're doing. So just thank you on behalf of all the gays, all the gays of TikTok. Thank you very much, and nice to meet you.
Yes, thank you very much, James. Cheers.
Thank you as always for taking the time out of your day to watch or listen to this podcast episode. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I did making it. And don't forget, if you did want to leave a rating or review, please do so. You can do that from wherever you're listening from, pretty much. And lastly, a huge thanks goes out to Jake Williamson. If you did want to get in touch with him, his details are going to be in the show notes as well. Until next time, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you very soon.